Your comments and questions. Thanks for coming tonight.
Introduction by Ward 2 Councillor at Large Susan Albright.
Good evening, folks. I know people are still filtering in. So this is our 7th of 8 board meetings on zoning redesign. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback from the other boards. One of the things I want to stress tonight is we're making changes. Based upon some of the feedback, we'll continue to make changes. As Rachel will point out, we're due to get a second draft out at the end of April? End of May, sorry. Move this up there, apologize. So we're continuing to refine this. So there's a lot of information that we're going to share with you tonight. It can be confusing for the technical person and the layperson alike. So we ask that you be patient, and we'll try to be extremely patient with you as well as you kind of walk through all of this information. We have a short presentation we're going to share with you, and then really the bulk of the evening is designed to hear your comments and answer your questions. So without further ado, I'll introduce
And I'm
Rachel.
recording.
And Julia is recording.
And so is John.
For prosperity. Rachel Ned Carney is going to walk through the presentation.
All right. So before we get into the presentation, I just want to give a general clarification for those of you who came in and checked in rather quickly. So you may have been handed 2 pieces of paper today. We're going to talk through what they are in a little bit, but I wanted to give just a brief overview of them. So what we've given everyone is, having pulled information from our database, both the zoning district that you're in and the information that's most pertinent to the district, as well as the building type that most represents your property as it stands today. And again, we'll talk through a little bit more about those sheets in a few minutes. So here's our quick agenda for tonight. This should be more than about 20 minutes, and then we really want to get right into discussion. Our objective. So tonight we're going to provide an overview and orientation to the first draft ordinance, and then we're really going to focus in on that discussion piece, hearing your questions and your comments. I want to emphasize 2 things tonight. First, that what we're presenting is on our first draft. We put out our first draft in October 2018, October 22nd, and we're actually already starting to look at edits for the second draft. To give everyone a little background, if you don't talk about zoning that often, this is maybe new material. Zoning is the regulation of the built environment, the regulation of buildings, how they're placed, what they can be used for. It's really, when it comes down to it, it's the rule book for development. That's what zoning is, it's a rule book. And it has a few central elements. So the zoning ordinance always comes with a map, divides the city into zoning districts. Then there's the ordinance itself. This is what our current ordinance looks like. That's where you'll find all of the rules that give that map meaning. Central to zoning are dimensional requirements, how big buildings can be, how tall they can be. Then there's development and use standards. Pull out this page, which you can't really read, but this is the page we have on heliports. The City of Newton allows heliports, but we have very particular criteria about why and where you may have a heliport. The hospital, for instance, is allowed a heliport. That's about it. There's also sections in the zoning ordinance that talk about the decision-making procedures. What decisions are made about the zoning ordinance? Who makes those decisions? How are they made? What criteria are used for judging whether or not a project should get approved? Quick 30 seconds on the history of zoning in Newton. Newton has had zoning since 1922. Zoning first came into the United States in 1916 in New York City. We then hired the planner who did that zoning, and brought them to Newton to do our zoning. So Newton and New York look exactly alike, right? The rules here, this tackles a bunch of the key milestones in Newton zoning history. 1922 is our first ordinance. It really only looks at what commercial areas are versus residential areas, and it says height limits. That's it. 1941 and 1953 are really the key dates. If it's all right, we're going to take questions at the end.
Can you talk a little bit more distinctly and slower?
Absolutely. Thank you for that reminder. try it a little bit slow. So 1941 and 1953 are key dates when we're talking about the neighborhoods. The majority of the rules in the neighborhoods come from the ordinances in 41 and 53. 87 is the next major milestone. That's where there was an update to the commercial districts. The work we're going to talk about tonight starts in 2011. It's been 8 years since this project started. There's been a few phases to it. The first phase of the zoning redesign process comes in 2015. That was really a modernization of the format. We added pictures for the first time. We added tables for the first time. The content work has really been going on since 2016. Going back to that 2011 date, the Zoning Reform Group, which is a group of counselors and citizens, put together a report with several themes. Those are really our marching orders for this project. Hard to read all that text, but in short, the purpose of this project is to create a zoning ordinance that preserves and enhances what we love about Newton, while modernizing and advancing issues we care about, like climate change, housing affordability, and diversity. In our 2016 to 2018 process, the first major piece of it was the pattern book, which was really trying to understand Newton as it is built today. What are the patterns? What are the characteristics that makes Newton Newton? What are the heights of buildings? How far are they set back from the neighbors? All of those features. So we created a master database with the help of our consultants, and that's really what you see when you look at that pattern book document that's at the library. The next thing we did is we did a series of events focused on key issues that the zoning ordinance might help the city address. So we looked at sustainability, how zoning relates to homeowners, economic development, housing, transportation, the arts, and had an opportunity for people to give us their ideas. So we had a short presentation and then roundtable discussions where we got tons of fantastic ideas from the community. We want to dive in tonight into this first draft that came out in October and show you where we are today in terms of the edit process that we're starting. This is the map. There's a copy up here, as well as a copy of just Ward 2, if you're interested in getting a little bit closer out to it later on. We want to walk you through what the districts are. We're going to use Newton Corner because Newton Corner actually has most of the districts within the immediate vicinity. So the ordinance has 4 residence districts. Residence 1, Residence 2, Residence 3, and the neighborhood general. Residence 1 and Residence 2, that's the lightest yellows. You can see here. Those are our single residence, so single family districts. The only building types that are allowed there are single family homes. The Residence 3 district allows for multifamily homes as well. So single family homes and multifamily homes, but no commercial. Neighborhood General is a transition district. Neighborhood General is primarily a residence district, but it allows small-scale commercial facilities. So that really occurs at the edges of the village centers, where you see the neighborhoods meeting the village center. Then we have 3 village center districts. Village 1, Village 2, Village 3, and they go up in intensity at each step. So with Newton Corner, you see all 3. It's one of the few places in the city where we actually have mapped this Village 3 district. Village 3 covers the Crown Plaza and 1 Newton Place. The Village 3 district is allowing those largest building types. The Crown Plaza is a 10-story building. The Village 3, though, is really only mapped to those locations where we already have large buildings. After that, we've mapped the Village 2, 2 Newton Place, and the Village 1. The majority of the city are going to fall into one of those 7 districts. But we have another set of districts called the single-purpose districts that you'll see around the city as well. So the single-purpose districts include our public use district, which is anything owned by the city, the state, or another agency that's used for public purposes. So our city parks and schools are mapped to that. Recreation is the only one that's, oops. Not on this one, once it's not on this map. But recreation is going to cover the golf courses and actually the cemetery. The office district is a district for office buildings and lab spaces, things like Wells Avenue. It's those office buildings that are set a little bit away from the village and aren't as active pursuits. So you can see that in this purple color. Fabrication is also not shown here, but fabrication is the modernization of our manufacturing district. It allows a wide range of manufacturing and arts uses. So you think about a production studio, maker space, that might be something that you'd see in a fabrication district. This orange kind of color here, the non-contextual multi-residence district, which has a really long name, is covering properties like Chestnut Hill Towers. This here is the senior housing facility. It's those places where you have a larger than typical residential structure, again, like Chestnut Hill Towers or Manhattan Woods, or you have a townhouse complex that isn't really integrated with the rest of the neighborhood. Think the Gables. The other two districts that you see here, regional retail is covering the mall. That's what it's meant to cover, is the mall, the street, those larger regional retail destinations. And then we have a new campus institutional district, which you can see just the edge of. That's covering our universities and private schools. There are several areas on this map that are still under study. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. So Needham Street. Needham Street, the City Council adopted a vision plan for Needham Street last year. We're using that as our guidepost on Needham Street more than the current conditions. For the most part, the rest of the city, we're really looking at what's on the ground today. Is it a 2-family house? Is it an office building? We're looking at current conditions. On Needham Street, we're looking to that vision plan. In Washington Street, we have another project. Barney's going to touch on it a little at the end. The Hello Washington Street is proposing zoning based on that vision plan for the area outlined in the orange. The third place that we're still studying is Riverside. Riverside is also currently under a vision plan process, and there will be a project proposed there, so this is really a placeholder. I want to talk through a couple of the key features of the first draft and zoom in on Ward 2. So, what you see here on this page is the what looks like an average street, maybe. The blue are our properties, the brown are the houses. So, you think an average street in Newton, all the lots are the same size, all the buildings are about the same size. That's not always how it works here in Newton. Sometimes we have double lots. The current ordinance says that when you have a double lot, you can have a double house. We've been hearing that that is not the outcome that most people would like to see, but they'd like to see houses that are more in context with the rest of the neighborhood. The other thing that happens is when you have a lot with a tail, you get to have a larger house than the rest of the community. So even though these lots all look about the same, because this one had the extra land, they get the larger lot, the larger house. Results in projects that look like this. House that's much, much larger than the neighboring structures along the street and feels out of context. The draft ordinance is going to shift this relationship. The draft ordinance is going to focus first on the buildings, making sure that we're getting the right size buildings in the districts. And then the rules about the lots come second. So turning to those sheets that I mentioned at the beginning. The building types are one set of the sheets that you got. So most people got a building type sheet related to their, one that most relates to their home. The building type is going to have all the regulations that relate directly to the building, directly to the building shape and size, and also some design features. So you'll see rules like minimum and maximum building width and depth, the maximum building footprint, which is how much square footage it can sit on the ground, a maximum height, and some design standards. But not all building types are allowed in each district. That's critical. We've selected a set of building types that fit into each district. So for instance, the residence 2 allows the house B, the house C, and the house D. It does not allow the house A. The house A is also a single-family house, but it's a very large single-family house. We're not allowing the house A in the residence 2 district because this district has narrower lots, smaller lots, and the house A is not quite appropriate. So you have to choose from the 3 that are allowed on any lot in the residence 2 district. The second sheet that we handed out has the district standards. And on that sheet, you're going to find a list called lot standards. Lot standards are the rules that pertain to the creation of new lots and the placement of a building on the lot. So there's 3 rules that you're going to see. Frontage. Frontage is how wide the lot has to be. This is important when we're talking about subdivision potential. It also includes the setback standards, which is how far the building has to be from the neighbors. Lastly, it has lot coverage. Lot coverage is how much of the lot can be covered by buildings and other features. The inverse of lot coverage is the percent that has to be left open, the percent that has to stay green. So lot coverage includes the building, but it's also going to include driveways, decks, pools, sheds. If you built it, it's covered. Just to touch on a few of the other themes and things that you'll see if you read through the draft ordinance. Parking and transportation. This new draft ordinance is requiring bike parking. It's reducing the automobile parking minimums and adding a parking maximum in certain circumstances. It's allowing for the sharing of underutilized parking so that if you have a bank next to a restaurant and the restaurant opens after the bank closes, that there can be a sharing of that resource across the two. The last thing that it's adding in on transportation and parking is this idea of transportation demand management. This is really for those largest projects. But what we're looking at is that those largest projects, we want them to be actively managing their transportation demand, which means actively trying to reduce the number of people who go to and from it by themselves in a car. That's going to be through things like incentives, paying for that person to have a T-Pass, so that they're not paying for it directly and instead are getting that through either the employer or the condo owner or building owner. Next, sustainable buildings and environmental design. This ordinance is trying to tackle some of the big issues, particularly around climate change. So there's places throughout this ordinance where you're going to see incentives for environmentally friendly buildings. The city is simultaneously working on a climate action plan, and we're looking to that work to inform our continued emphasis on these standards. Arts and culture institutions. We know that the arts is a very important in Newton, so we're looking at clarifying how arts and culture come to be. Right now, we don't have a lot of clear rules about what happens when you have a theater. What happens when you want to open a gallery? We want to clarify all of that and make it easy for artists to call Newton home. Not enough hands. One of the things that we're looking at for the second draft is a requirement that a new large project include a percentage for arts. So they have to include some sort of public art on site or space for cultural institutions. Development review. We are looking at the development review processes in this ordinance and in this draft. So what we're looking at is that the development review should match the level of the project. So a formulaic project should have a easier level of review than a really complicated project. We think it's important that the really complicated projects have the most opportunity for discussion and public input. So, looking back at that building type sheet again, you'll see several places where it says SP. SP stands for special permit. So the house B has a height, it has a footprint. Those things can be adjusted by special permit. Every time when you see that line, there's a line that says by right, that means the project follows the rules exactly, follows the rules that we've written into the ordinance. When it says special permit, that means we think it needs more review. It needs something, it's a little bit unique. We need to have a conversation about it that's much more in depth. There's been a lot of talk over the years about the idea of a large house review. That threshold that you see on each of the house types says, okay, this project is particularly large. We think it needs to be reviewed, to have some design review aspect to it. A few of the building types also have the administrative site plan approval. That's a slightly different thing. The administrative site plan approval is by right projects, but they need an additional level of staff review. So the example of this one is the proximity rule. There's 3 building types for which we've written a proximity rule: the house D, the apartment house, and the small apartment building. The proximity rules say that it's by right, but only if they can find 3 of the exact same type within 500 feet of the site. That proximity rule would require an additional check by city staff. Hey, did they do the work right? Did they find those 3 projects? Are those 3 projects legally existing projects? Are they illegally created? So that additional level of check takes it into this administrative site plan approval process. Let's take a moment and look at Ward 2. I'm going to show you the map for the current map and the new map. And we're going to flip it back and forth a few times, and I'll take it slow, just so everyone can take a look at how the 2 maps compare. This is the current map, and this is the first draft map. They're pretty close. You'll see that there's some things that change, but there's a reason that they change. The first draft map is based on what's on the ground. That's the first thing that we looked at when we did this map. What is on the ground today? Current map was something we did look at, but it's not the first thing that we looked at in creating this new draft map is what's actually on the ground today, what's built right now. So logically, there are some similarities. These darker brown colors are the multifamily districts. Oops. And logically, there are multifamily properties in them. The brown here is the Residence 3 district, which allows the multiple family homes. We're going to talk a lot about this R3 district, because this is one of the places that we're already making some edits. So in the October draft, and anyone who's got an R3 piece of paper in front of them, this is what you'll see on it. In the October draft, we had by right 3 building types: the house B, which is our medium-sized home; the house C, which is our smaller home; and the 2-unit house. By site plan approval with that proximity rule, we allowed the apartment house and the small apartment building.
What is small?
Small is 4,200 square feet, so it's about 2 times the size of a house. How many units? Oh, sorry. How many units is 3 to 10? So, that proximity rule, I want to talk through the edits because we're already making edits. So the proximity rule, we've understood from several of the other ward meetings and through our discussions with council that this tool may not be right for Newton right now. So we've proposed to take it out for the next draft. We've also proposed to take out the apartment house and replace it with a smaller 3-unit building. So this is smaller in size and also limited to 3 units. Same thing with the small apartment building. We're also talking about removing that and replacing it with a smaller, both in size and in number of units, 4 to 8 unit structure. Next thing that we're proposing as part of this package of edits, and we talked this through with council on Monday, is the idea of splitting the Residence 3 district into 2 districts. What would be the new Residence 3 district would be the house B, the house C, and the 2-unit, and that would be it. What you'll notice in red is that we're also starting to change some of the numbers, so making those building types all a little bit smaller. Then what we're looking at is creating a new residence 4 district, which has the House B, the House C, the 2-unit, and the 3-unit by right, with that 4 to 8 unit only by special permit. This residence 4 district would be mapped to locations where there already are those types of buildings. Just going to touch through next steps and schedule, and then get right into questions and comments. We're right now preparing for that second draft. We've already started making some edits, and there are a lot more that are being considered. We're looking forward to hearing your feedback and thoughts as we move into that. We are having many more conversations. So we have routine conversations with the City Council Zoning and Planning Committee. We have one more word-by-word meeting to go, and then we are going to be looking to set up meetings with any community groups that would like to host us, as well as office hours. That second draft is anticipated for the end of May, beginning of June. Here's our website. There's tons of material there. We hope that you can take a look. There's an interactive map where you can flip back and forth between the current map and the proposed map, as well as lots of other material. I'm going to turn things over to Barney. Close us off.
Thank you. Okay, so Rachel mentioned the Washington Street Vision Plan, and I think this gets to the kind of confusion that some people have, because two things are going on at the same time. There's a zoning redesign for the whole city, and there's kind of this separate initiative that's just focused on the area that's shown in the kind of hatched area, which is Hello Washington Street, which is getting kind of a different level of scrutiny. There's a vision plan associated with it, and zoning that's separate and apart from this effort. So I wanted to kind of make that clear, and I know there are a lot of folks that live in the area or adjacent to the area and are very interested in that topic as well. So Lily and I are both here. There's Lily right there. We're happy to talk to you more about that. But we really would love to focus tonight on the zoning redesign, since that's kind of a weighty topic in and of itself. So if we can kind of direct most of the questions there, and we can talk a little about Hello Washington with you after the question and answers. So I think the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to kind of be the MC and go around and take questions. My colleague James and of course Rachel will be here to do their best to answer questions. So what am I leaving out, Lily? And Lily's going to take this. Okay, so why don't we get started right away? Okay, we have one right here.
Abigail, I live at 32 Wilton Place in Woodville. My question is, if we live in a neighborhood of Victorian homes and one Victorian home gets sold, is it possible for whoever buys that Victorian home to knock it down and put up a, what did you say, 4 to 8 unit place? Because we're also in the residential 3 and house B district.
Did you get that question? So
I think I did.
yeah.
Yep. Okay. So, question is, if someone were to knock down a house in the R3 district, what could happen afterwards? Could someone replace it with a 48-unit project as an example? So, first off, of course, I suppose the first thing I should point to is the new R3 rules that Rachel was presenting earlier. With the 4 to 8 unit in particular, we're proposing now that that should go to a special permit process. So the first thing someone would have to do would be to go to the special permit granting authority, make an application, make a proposal, there'd be a public hearing process that would accompany that, opportunity for public comment, and all those things. It's hard to speak to a specific example of what could happen, right? Because yes, theoretically, someone could knock down a house in that scenario and replace it with a 4 to 8 unit. I think one would have to weigh out, a developer looking at a parcel of that nature would have to weigh out those options. the example, specific one that you gave is of a Victorian house in a neighborhood of Victorian houses, right? And in those instances, that house likely is of a substantial value already, and so a developer who's making, you know, for every decision that they're making, it's a math problem at the end of the day, right? It's a finance problem, challenge that they're sorting through. And a house of substantial value, they would have to realize, can I actually make a return on the back end? So that's kind of the fundamental question of that would go through anyone's someone would have to make a calculation on. And then you have to compare it against our existing zoning ordinance, where, you know, depending on what district you're in, that may actually be allowed right now under the zoning ordinance. So,
Who would decide?
So we're gonna not take questions with people that don't have their hand up. So,
there we go.
yeah. So we're gonna go right here.
Who would decide?
Thank you.
Right, so the question is, who would decide in terms of what, whether they would be allowed to build it? That special permit?
Two levels of special permit.
Sure, absolutely, right. So as we propose the ordinance right now, the special permit would go to the planning board for projects of that size.
There's only one board, it's the Planning and Development Board, yes. Yeah, yeah.
And what's it for the city council?
I'm sorry, do you want to use the mic or do you want me to?
And I'll repeat the question. So when would it get kicked to the city council?
So right now, at our proposal, we've put projects of 20 units and above would go to the city council. And of course, that's a movable line, but right now, that's where we put the proposal.
All right, no question right here.
I thought it was 21 and above.
I just have a question about the
21 and above?
definitions. I'm looking at the R2 district, and it says, you know, houses B, C, and D, but then it says alternate lot building configurations, which are rear lots, multi-unit conversion, and courtyard clusters. What are those?
Sure. So the question is, what are these other, many of you have on your district sheets, these things that are allowed by special permit at the bottom, alternate configurations. So the rear lot, something that exists in our zoning ordinance today, it's the ability to take a long lot and divide it and put a home in the back. That under our current zoning ordinance requires a special permit, and we're proposing in the first draft and the future ordinance that it also requires a special permit. One of the things that we are doing though is we're putting more requirements on that. We're tamping down on one's ability to do that and creating a greater set of rules about how one can do a rear lot. One of the other ones is a multi-lot or multi-unit conversion. Again, that's also something that exists within the zoning ordinance today, also by special permit. It's really aimed at the idea where someone wants to preserve a historic building. In the case of the R2 district, it's aimed at large civic buildings like an old church, but it can also be used for a large single-family house, one of our large Victorians, for example. And again, by special permit, they would be able to divide that up into multiple units. Again, that's aimed at the idea of preserving historic buildings, and there's criteria towards that goal. The final thing that you reference is the cluster development proposal, which is it was a newer idea for Newton. What we're proposing is this would replace the ability to build townhouses in the residential neighborhood. So right now, by special permit, in all the residence districts, one can build townhouses, and we see these popping up, particularly here on the north side of the city. We think actually frequently these townhouses are really inappropriate for these neighborhood areas, and we're directing that type of building to areas closer to village centers. So, but in the R1, R2, and R3, we're replacing it with these cluster developments, which is basically the idea of smaller scale, single or two-family houses, depending on the district, that are significantly smaller than what's otherwise allowed on the lot. They'd be clustered or spaced around a shared green space that is a minimum of 400 square feet of green space per unit. It's a type of development approach that's really growing in popularity across the country. It's starting to be introduced here in Massachusetts. There's a couple examples here locally. Perhaps the most one that's easiest to find is one called Riverwalk in Concord Riverwalk. So I encourage you to check it out. If you're interested, you can simply Google the term.
Okay. Got one over here, and then I get to the other side of the room.
I live on Omar Terrace. I have two relatively short questions. One is, what is the tallest building going forward that could be built in the second ward that we live in? And what is the pass-through rate on special permit requisitions?
So the tallest building in Ward 2, I guess would be in the Village 2 district, and which is 3 or 4 stories by a special permit.
Need to know the height.
So
We'll look that up.
Yeah, we'll look that up real quick, but it would be, as under this project, under the zoning redesign project, the tallest building would be, I believe, be 3, maybe 4 stories by special permit in the Village 2 district. The second question was, I'm sorry, remind me again.
With the special permit request, what is the rate of permits that are granted versus applied for?
Sure,
It's
under-
like a giant pool.
Under our, in the current zoning ordinance, I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head. I suspect it's a very high percentage of projects. Close to all of them probably get approved. But it's important to remember that's because they've gone through a significant vetting process. Many applicants, they come in and they talk to us. We do, with every single person who wants to do it, at least is interested in doing a project, they come to us and they do what's called a development review team meeting with us, where we talk through what is the process, what are the rules that apply, and we advise them on the issues that they're going to encounter. And many people at that point in time decide not to proceed forward. And then as you go forward, many applicants, as they start the process of a special permit review with the city council and with staff, they withdraw their application. So the process itself kind of winnows down to the point where it's pretty rare that there's actually a denial issued. That's a very rare occurrence because the process itself kind of winnows down those applications. So while it is a very high percentage, there's a kind of an asterisk on that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, more often than not, the projects are modified as well
Yes.
in response to both the analysis that the planning department does, and we have a really good land use committee that's been at this a while, so they know how to work these projects as well. So I have another question right here.
Two-part question. The first is, have you mapped the new R4, the proposed R4? And then secondly,
Good question.
getting a sense of what the population is within Ward 2, I'm wondering what impacts, has anyone looked at the expected population change that would result as the impact of the new zoning regulations would be implemented?
Okay. So first, we have not yet mapped the R4. This is something we proposed only on Monday to the Zoning and Planning Committee, and of course we have work to do to incorporate that both into the text and the map for that second draft release at the end of May, beginning of June timeframe. That is our target date. On the second question, we have not tried to estimate population. We did, though, for Monday. On Monday, we shared with the Zoning and Planning Committee a model that we completed comparing the current zoning ordinance, the first draft ordinance, and then many of the changes that we proposed to the parameters of the zoning ordinance, what we're calling our February adjustments or our February draft numbers. We did some modeling work that compared all 3 of those on the parameters of number of units that would be created, number of lots that would be created, and the vulnerability to tear down. So what are the percentage of lots or homes within the city that would be vulnerable to tear down under each one of these ordinances? So that all of that information is actually available through our website, the Zoning Redesign website, which was up on the screen a moment ago. And what you want to look for is the memo from the Zoning and Planning Committee meeting from February 25th. So lots of great information information in there. That presentation that was given that night is also available on the website.
Yeah, one of the interesting factoids that came out of that discussion, at least for me, so if tomorrow everyone that could add an additional unit in Newton decided they want to, by right, we could add 2,000 units. So, which goes to show that even though there's the ability to do it, it's a complicated formula to actually move forward. It requires someone to make an affirmative decision to sell their property, to subdivide. So it's kind of complicating to predict exactly how things work out. So.
And let me clarify in case it wasn't clear, that was 2,000 additional units under Newton's current zoning ordinance.
That's correct, yeah. Okay, got a question back there.
I understand that you are going to potentially eliminate proximity rule concerning these multiple unit apartment buildings. Would you consider a rule that would limit the number of multiple unit apartment buildings within a geographical area? I submit 500 feet, as was the prior rule on proximity.
We're happy to take it as a comment, as an idea, and think through what the implications of that might be. I guess that's all I have to say about it. We're happy to take a look at it. Thank you.
I just wanted clarification. So the Hello Washington, so part of the area by Craft Street, which is 10 stories by special permit, that is in Ward 2.
It's not, I'm sorry, we've been trying to be very clear. The Hello Washington Street project and the zoning redesign project are separate projects.
Okay.
So,
But her question was, what's the highest building would be in Ward 2? Could be 10 stories.
but not under the,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I apologize. We're trying to be very clear and not intermix these projects.
That's fine.
They're not part of the same zoning law. That's the point we're making.
But the other thing is the cluster housing. So I did, with the October zoning, in R3, it would allow 3,600 square feet, 2 families on a 1-acre lot with no parking requirements.
Yeah, so, yeah. So,
Oh, is there? Because I didn't notice it.
Yeah, so there would be a parking requirement.
Okay, for cluster houses.
Yes, because it's one project together, so it would be probably a minimum of 1 parking space per unit. And one thing I don't know how you're arriving at 18 units. Is that because
I'm using open space and the floor area for each one and things like that. And I know that changing the numbers, so that number will change, which might be more units but smaller, because your footprints are getting smaller.
Yeah.
So
I'm just trying to figure out, because there's a lot that would go into the design of the project itself. But right, the minimum size of the lot that one of these could be built on is 1 acre. In and of itself, not very many acre properties around.
But you can buy multiple
You may
properties.
be able to
and
buy
make it-
multiple properties.
And make an acre.
But then,
Yes.
yeah, then your math problem gets more difficult. But then it's 400 square feet of open space per unit on the site, and then there is still going to be some driveway and parking infrastructure that has to be accommodated. So, but thank you.
Thank you. I live on Wildwood Avenue. When I look at the setbacks here, so the front is 10 feet, the sides are 10 feet, and the rear is 20 feet. That seems to be like a big building on a lot. Like when I think of my building, it's already a large size on a fairly small lot, but given these setbacks, I could, like whoever came after me, could tear down my place and build a significantly bigger building. So I'm just wondering, like, how the zone accounts for that.
So, well, first off, setback only determines where the building can be located on the lot. The building type is what you want to look at to figure out how big the building can actually be, right? Because the building type rule has a footprint and a height. And so if you imagine for a moment, you have your lot, and then the setbacks are defining kind of the space within that where the building can locate, the building size is still capped. So that building, if everyone can see my imaginary boxes, if this is the building, it could be here, it could be here, but it can't be bigger, it can't expand to fill that whole space within the setback.
Then the square footage.
Yeah, the square footage is capped by the building type, not by the setbacks. Yeah.
Ellen, right here.
Can you tell us, in simple terminology, the relationship between Hello Washington Street and the zoning redesign project?
Sure, I will. You let me know if I've got it simple. So the zoning redesign project, again, it's a project that stretches back to 2011, and it was really built on this idea of building a better zoning ordinance for the city that did more to protect these neighborhoods, advance these various issues identified in the comprehensive plan, from climate change, environmental regulation, to housing diversity, economic development, and so on. But it looks at the entire city, and it's aimed at putting together a better zoning ordinance for the entire city. The Washington Street vision effort is really focused on the Washington Street area, and it's saying what is the city's vision for what should occur here. You know, it's a dialogue with the community around what should occur here in the Washington Street area, and then a zoning proposal specific to and informed by that vision process. So
it's it can be changed as the basic zoning for the entire city can be changed as a function of this vision for Washington.
The vision for Washington Street is going to, it includes zoning specific just to that study area for the Washington Street corridor. And this larger citywide zoning project is advancing on a schedule that's much longer term. Right? Our proposal, we're going to release a second draft in May, June. We're looking at a third draft sometime in the fall, and some adoption, hopefully before the end of 2019. But we realize that given the size and breadth and depth of this project, that this is an ongoing dialogue in the community and with the zoning planning committee and the entire city council to work on that project. Washington Street is really responding to what needs to happen on Washington Street itself, and could advance ahead of this, in which case it would be incorporated into the existing zoning ordinance just for the Washington Street area, just within that boundary of that district. And then, should it be adopted, we would then incorporate it into our draft later. Did we hit simple? Did I get there?
Yeah, more or less. What I don't understand is, well, number one, are there any other areas in the city that have this special?
Sure.
And
Right.
Number two, how might a building that's around Washington Street now be changed as a result of the zoning ordinance, or the other way around?
So, as was alluded to in the presentation, we did a visioning process for Needham Street. That was a smaller scale project because we did it in-house, and we didn't include zoning specifically in that project. So in that case, for our zoning redesign project, we are making some zoning proposed changes to the zoning for that area based on that visioning process. We anticipate doing more of these types of studies, analysis, and zoning changes in the future in other parts of the city. It's really responding to these parts of the city where there is a potential for significant change based on economics, market forces, and all of those other things. There is a proactive responsibility on the city's part to prepare for and be prepared for these types of changing places. So that answers that first question. Yes, I think we can anticipate looking forward to other parts of the city in the future. The second question, how would a building change on Washington Street according to this zoning? it depends which zoning we're talking. Are we talking about the Washington State zoning proposal or this overall citywide proposal? I think the other clear distinction between what we're doing with this citywide ordinance and Washington Street is our citywide proposal is really being informed by what's on the ground today. It's really starting at a baseline of saying, City of Newton developed over a period of time, largely before our existing zoning ordinance, and that our future zoning ordinance should be based on those patterns of development that actually exist on the ground today. Whereas the Washington Street proposal is really focused on this vision of the future and is kind of more responsive to market forces and all the other issues that are being discussed in that process.
James, I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Okay, hi.
Washington Street, talk to Barney after.
So I live in Newtonville, and I live in Kimball Terrace, Residence 2, in the House B. And I noticed that all the descriptions of House B, the maximum is 2.5 stories. So can you define what 2.5 stories is?
Yeah.
Well, because most of the like my house, most of the houses around here are actually 3 stories.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be.
So we've defined the top story that through roof types. So what we have is 2.5 stories is 2 full stories, and then the area under a peak roof. Versus a mansard roof, which is the vast majority of the floor, is a 3-story. So there's a roof types that are equal to no stories, like a flat roof, and then there's roof types that are equal to a half-story, like a gable roof, and then there's roof types that are equal to a full story, like the mansard roof. So we have been talking to people who have 3-story homes with a full mansard roof. They're not conforming today, and they would continue to be in the future, which means they continue to exist. You don't have to change your roof, but no one new would be able to build that. There is some process around being non-conforming we can talk after.
And then I just had a second question. From the beginning, we talked about like different building types, and there was like public, I think, or something, you know, like the postal government buildings. Are there any regulations on those? Like, could the post office build a 10-story post office, or is it just whatever they want to do?
Yeah, so civic buildings are interesting. Civic buildings, civic includes government buildings. So anything a city building has to go through its own process. There are city processes in order to get a civic building built. So think about the process that all of our schools are going through. That's the process we have that would apply to any new city building. A religious institution has special protections under the state law. So religious institutions can go anywhere in the city. They do not have to follow their zoning exactly. There are some rules that apply, but most of the rules don't. So a new religious institution can come and they can locate anywhere.
Okay, we have a question here.
Post office is different. Post office generally follows the standard rules.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. One, I just was wondering if you could please explain what parking sharing with businesses means, and is that going to be mandatory for businesses, or is it voluntary, and how that works? And the second question I have is if you could explain how you came about the new maximum square footage, like for the multiple unit buildings, because it seems like you're proposing in the new zoning to build much, much smaller apartments. And wondering about that. Thank you.
Sure. So first question on shared parking. So shared parking would be a choice by the business owners, and really the best example is probably the example that Rachel gave earlier, which is, you know, frequently if you have a restaurant and a bank next to each other, and say the restaurant is in an existing building, doesn't have any parking in it, and the bank next door has a small parking lot. The banks frequently close at 5 o'clock. Restaurants frequently pick up business after 5 o'clock, and so there's an opportunity there to share the parking resource. And so basically, under this ordinance, the restaurant would be able to contract with the bank to use those parking spaces in the evening.
But they can't do that now?
No, they cannot, no. Zoning does not allow that. We know it happens, but it's not allowed. Second question was, how did we come up with the sizes of the buildings? Initially, our first step in that was really looking at what's the existing building sizes look like today. We talked about earlier in the presentation the pattern book. that was an in-depth analysis of the entire city, every lot in the city, every building in the city. And from that, we really developed this master database of information about the existing built environment of the city. And then we used that information to develop the set of standards that are in the first draft ordinance today. As we've refined those numbers, part of what's driven the refinement of that numbers is the feedback we're getting from meetings like this. And one of the things we're hearing is that in the neighborhoods, people are very concerned about the notion of very large multifamily buildings. And so we're really trying to limit the size, and particularly the size of those buildings as they appear in a neighborhood setting such as the R3. So for the 3-unit building, we're really trying to make sure that that 3-unit building is in a comparable scale to a single or 2-family house that's there nearby in the neighborhood. And if you look at the historic patterns in the neighborhoods, you can often, it's actually often hard to distinguish just based on their dimensions, a 3-family, a 2-family, and a single family in Newton today, because those buildings are actually often of similar scale and size. So we think that's kind of appropriate for moving forward as a guideline.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So I just want to welcome Councilor Greenberg and Councilor Baker. Go with us tonight, so here we go.
Thank you. My name is Brian Barish. I live on Lowell Ave. I'm wondering, are there any green building standards or environmental aspects to this process, or is that going to be a separate track?
Absolutely. There's right now there's actually 2 sections in Article 8 that are dealing with green buildings, green design, and also sustainable lot features. So we built in, some of the provisions we've already built in are things like if you're building a building that has a roof area of over 10,000 square feet, at least 50% of that roof area should be devoted to solar panels. Or you have to demonstrate otherwise how you're achieving a goal of including alternative energy in the project. So that's just one example. There's a number of other examples. We're also including incentives for green building design.
Why
So
don't they
build
do
a
the
building
solar roofs right
that
now?
meets some environmental standard that we're working on right now. There's something out there called passive house design, which is essentially a very low energy use building. You would actually get a density bonus with that, but no increase in the size of the building. So the physical size of the building would be the same, but you'd be allowed to produce additional units in it. Finally, we're working right now with a climate action plan being developed with a group of citizens, and there's public meetings on that as well. Someone would be interested in following up on that. And we're looking to that process and those various experts involved in that to give us some advice on other things we might include in the ordinance that would really advance green design, addressing climate change, sustainability, and the like. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Reiser. I live on Clapham Place. Looks like my house is destined to become a 3-unit building here in designation. And I'm interested in kind of what are the parking requirements for a 3-unit building?
Sure.
Talk a little bit about parking in general.
Sure. So the proposal, the first draft proposal at this point in time for a 3-unit building would require 3 parking spaces. Generally, as a minimum, yeah, 3-unit building would be required to have 3 parking spaces as a minimum. Generally, on the issue of parking, we're really trying to modernize how our ordinance addresses the issue of parking. So we're pushing down on the minimum number of parking spaces required across all categories of uses, and introducing this idea of a maximum parking limit in terms of maximum number of parking spaces. Really recognizing that parking isn't universally a benefit. It's got a lot of public costs that accompany parking, from environmental impacts to stormwater. We really need to address those issues as well.
So just add one more thing. The reducing the minimum parking doesn't mean we won't have parking. There's always going to be parking, and what we're saying with that is that we want to shift more of the burden of thinking about what the best number is to the development community, because they have the highest tune into what the market wants.
My name is Peter Harrington. I live on Lowell Avenue. I have a couple of comments. One, in looking at your new corner plan, where there were just individual lots zoned differently, my opinion is that you come dangerously close to having spot zoning problems in that sort of thing, happening on Washington Street. The second thing is, I want to concur with what's been said about the usefulness of the staff reviewing the project. And I think for small developers and homeowners, it's very, very worthwhile. It's very helpful. It saves a lot of cost. I think what the problems people have with it is with the big developers that they don't agree with that. And the other comment is on the shared parking. I don't know who gave you the opinion that it can't be done now. I would disagree with that opinion. And I think that the question of liability is going to create a big problem. And maybe the city might find some way to address helping with that liability issue that people fall. The question I have is about your definitions. You have a very good definition about what a half story is. Is that going to go into the ordinance? And number two, now we talk about your context zoning. Is there any definition of what a neighborhood is? Because you refer to neighborhoods 3 or 4 times in your plan, and sometimes it seems to be bigger and other times smaller.
The question is the half story going to be included in the definition of half story in the ordinance? Absolutely. It's a yes. And then our definition of neighborhood, really zoning ordinances work in districts. So I probably should be more precise in our language that each time what we're really talking about is what's happening within the zoning district. We don't have a definition specific to neighborhoods.
But if I could just follow up on the context, is it just 1 or 2 buildings in the district, or is it a majority of the buildings, or just one nearby? Or
So the way context comes into play is actually in the development of the rules themselves. So that it's not that if I'm doing a building, I'm looking around at the context or something like that. It's more that we've used the context within the district, really the context within the city. That is, we've used the buildings that we see here today in the city that are already built to develop the standards and the rules that are going into that are in our first draft ordinance.
Currently, the size of a building in residential zone is based on the size of the lot and the FAR. And I think that this change to make the size of a building based on these various building types and the frontage will really help us make a more homogeneous neighborhood. One thing that I'm looking for, though, is incentives for historic preservation so that we can help save our historic houses.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll say that one of the things we're carrying forward is that that rule where if you preserve the historic character, the historic appearance of, say, an old church or a large house, in the process, you can receive a special permit to incorporate multiple units into that building. So we're carrying forward that preservation. Overall, in our efforts to reduce the number of teardowns in the city, that in and of itself should contribute towards preserving more of the existing historic character.
I'm Beth Smith. I live at 40 Foster Street, Newtonville. So I just want to pick up on the point about the role of the planning board and the city council, because I would agree that there are many matters that seem to come before the full city council and the committees that really don't need to, in terms of the scope of them and the impact of them. But what I wasn't clear about is how you came up with a number of 20 units that would have to rise to that level during the city council. To me, it seems like way too many units. That ought to be something less than that. That ought to be like triggers, so that's a question of how you came up with 20. Secondly, I think the reason you're getting questions about the relationship between the rezoning and the Washington Street planning is because in wards 2 and 3 in particular, we really have to try to sort out both. And we happen to abut the planning district. So for us, it's particularly relevant to the extent that you can try to get your terminology to be more similar. So for example, the Washington Corridor Plan, there's no Village 1 and there's no Village 2. There's Village Center, there's Village Central.
Good point.
Something. Yeah, Gateway, Arnullos. And I also think there may be inconsistencies with some of the heights that are allowed if you look at, to try to compare the two. So I've been trying to do that. It's been really difficult to do. But I think that's probably why you're getting some of those questions. And so in reality, the two really do tie together. They do correspond. And to the extent that you can try to, figure both of them out is important. The other thing is you're coming up with some interesting principles within the Washington Street corridor planning process that you may want to apply to develop in other parts of the city. So it's just
Thank you for that. On the question of how we drew the line, I think it was really just looking at the nature of projects we've seen over the last year or two and seeing that they kind of fell into a couple buckets. One being projects that were very large, and the other being projects that were on the small, medium size, that were basically under 20 units. And our sense was that those larger projects really represented the ones that were of a citywide scale of importance. But I'd submit again that really is the first draft, and if people, and in particular our city council, disagree that citywide significance is a lower number of units, then that's the answer, and that's where it ends up going.
Can I just add to that? I think context matters. So you could have an 8-unit building, depending on where you may want to put it, it can have a significant impact on that neighborhood. I think the Adams Street project is 12. Is that 12 units?
It was originally 18, I believe, when it was first proposed. Yeah. Right.
That would not have gone to city council.
It really is an excellent point, and we set up the ordinance so that it would be very easy to vary where that line is based on the context, or really based on what district it's in. So in a residential district, for example, the line could be lower, right? It could be 10, right? But in another district, maybe the line is higher for whatever reason. So thank you.
A lot of questions back here before I get to the front, so hang in there.
Hi, I have a question about R3. So I'm looking at the line that says 2 unit, and it says the max building footprint is 2,000. So that would apply whether the lot is 7,000 square feet or 30,000 square feet. It would always be a max of 2,000.
That's the size of the building type. Yeah.
Okay. So it just seems to me like, on a smaller line, it might be a little bit, maybe it's to scale, but on a larger line, it seems like it would be too small.
So again, this comes back to what Rachel was showing earlier on, that when you tie building size to the size of the lot, you introduce a variability and a potential for disruption of the character of the neighborhood. So really, the notion is that we start with building size, and we start with a building size that reflects the character and what people are interested in seeing within the neighborhoods, and we make that the standard.
I go right down here.
I want to mention that Governor Baker is pushing very hard through the legislature to change requirements in local areas to reduce the threshold of votes to change zoning from a 2/3 majority to a simple majority. How will that change this process, and how much input will local residents have?
Want to take that one, James?
So I can't really comment on Governor Baker's proposal. I will have to see how that wends its way through the legislative process at the state level. At the local level, I think what we can always assure is that your city councilors are here to listen to you. And so whatever the vote required to adopt zoning may be, the Newton City Council is still the decision-making body and is still going to be listening to their constituents. That's really as much as I say.
Here we go.
You had mentioned earlier that if there was no change in zoning law, you could max out at another 2,000 units. I think I heard that right, didn't I?
Yeah.
With this change, how many more units could you max out? Have you done any calculations?
We have, and again, that's in the model from the February 25th Zoning and Planning Committee memo. That's all in detail in there.
If you take a look at the memo and the presentation from Monday night, so if you go to the zoning redesign website, there's a section called Follow the Council Process, and all of our memos and presentations are there. So if you look at that memo about the build-out analysis, it's important to remember that what the build-out analysis model did was it gave us the maximum possible. Because we can't predict, right? So it's very hard to predict who's going to sell their house, what a new person's going to want, all of these details, and over time, how those things are going to play out. But what it does have is a maximum possible, and I don't remember the numbers offhand, but if you take a look at that memo with it.
Somebody look while we're here? Can you look it up?
Actually, I can't, because I don't have access to we don't have internet on this machine at the moment.
I can look it up. I'm assuming this whole project is to grow the neighborhood to a point where, it's at different times. But is there any ballpark idea of what we're doing here in terms of enlarging the population?
So again, if you absolutely maxed out the number of units that could be produced under the proposed ordinance, it would increase the number of units that would be allowed. So that's one of the interesting things when you run these numbers and run the analysis. So one of the things the model shows is that under the current ordinance, you end up with a lot of larger buildings, much more development area. Under our draft right now, the numbers we submitted on Monday, that development area shrinks, but the number of units goes up. And that's kind of the inherent trade-off that these different versions of the ordinance are presenting.
Hi, I'm interested in hearing more about how this plan might affect walkability, community spaces, outdoor cafes, other gathering areas. I don't know if this addresses any of that, but I'm interested in hearing more about that.
Sure. So within the zoning ordinance itself, there's a number of provisions built into it to really encourage the development of active public spaces. It's got a lot of rules, let's see, around, so larger yeah, thank you.
So the main one that we have built into the zoning ordinance is around fenestration, which is the number of windows and doors. And what it has is a ground floor requirement. So on our village districts, the village districts have a very high requirement for windows and doors on the ground floor. And the idea there is to really create a lively environment where there's a nice flow between the interior space and the exterior space. Along with that comes the frequency of doors. So there's actually a requirement that if someone's building a larger building, they have to have a door every 40 feet. And the idea there is, again, to create a lot of permeability and easy in and out.
And there is also a requirement for mixed-use buildings, larger buildings, to have public open space as part of them. So if you think about some of these projects that are being built right now in Newtonville, each of them through the special permit process, we're required to create some sort of active plaza, open space, public gathering space. That's being built into the baseline zoning ordinance as a requirement.
Peter Bruce, Cleveland Place. When you talked about the winnowing out process with these under 20 unit projects as they go, or might be thinking about going before the planning board, what are some of the main factors that might winnow out things, and how much can we be able to rely on them really serving our interests? That's one question. And another question is just, I'm really happy with the results of your build-out analysis and the way that you, now there's no longer an apartment house going to be on my block, which has no apartment houses on it right now, but I'm glad that there aren't going to be any from it. But I wonder how set in stone are these changes that you talked about from February 25th? Might there not be a regression back to what you were advocating before?
I don't think there'll be a regression, at least from our proposal. We've put those numbers out, we put those ideas out on February 25th. So I think, and you know, we didn't, when we presented that, we were presenting to the Zoning and Planning Committee, and we also had the Land Use Committee there and the Planning Board. And I guess, were we to regress, I guess we would only do so if the response had been, whoa, put that back in. Okay. Right, but we didn't hear that. What we heard was actually a lot of encouragement and a lot of sense that the proposal was going in the right direction. So I would anticipate seeing those when we actually get the second draft out. As far as the winning out process, I wish I could say that there was some really direct, like, this is what always happens, but I think what happens is the conversation we're having is about not only here's what the rules are, but also here's what you can expect in the process. Here's what, you know, the city is likely going to be asking for in terms of community benefits, in terms of expectations around development parameters, above and beyond what's written in the ordinance. And so that enters into the decision that a developer or property owner is making financially. And so for some of them, they kind of rethink and they say, this isn't the right project. For others of them, they shrink the project or they make some other significant change to turn it into a project that might actually be more acceptable and then arrive with the city council.
Okay, we're going to try and wrap this up. A couple more questions. I see 3 hands, so.
My name is Meg Ward. I live on Washington Street. I have 2 questions. My first question is, someone brought up about the shared parking in the scenario of 2 businesses. Yep. What about, what is in the ordinance for shared parking to be residential and like in a mixed use zone?
So, why don't I answer that one first and we'll do the second. So the way shared parking typically works is there's a formula that basically defines the degree to which sharing can happen based on what are the peak usage hours for a particular use. So residential's peak usage tends to be evening, night, and weekends, right? Which doesn't match up well with retail. What's that? Yeah, sure. More mornings, evenings, nights, and weekends. That's the peak. That's when most of the cars are there, right? So that doesn't line up well with restaurants. So the formula would say you can't share that parking space between a restaurant and residential. In some cases, residential and office might be appropriately shared because they're peaks.
Well, like I've dealt with that.
Find a build-out number.
And it doesn't work.
Sure, and one of those things those formulas do as well is they tend to say here's a percentage that you can share. You know, it doesn't say you can share all of them. It says, that you can share some percentage of those parking spaces between uses based on that formula. So, second question.
Second question is, I know you guys are very careful going to all the board to having meetings and looking for feedback on the zoning redesign. However, the Hello Washington Street zoning proposal is based on feedback from the entire city, not just the residents of the zone, Ward 1, 2, or 3. So my question is, how are you going to take the zoning proposal from Hello Washington Street and put in the consideration that you part right now, getting the local feedback from the residents in the ward.
Look at me for that one, sure. So we are doing that, just like we've made changes in zoning redesign from one draft to another. The second draft of Hello Washington was different from the first draft, and likely the third draft of Hello Washington, which is due at the end of April, will look different from the second draft. We were in West Newton last night with 250 people that had comments about Hello Washington. So we are incorporating those comments. Thank you. We got 2 more questions. I think we're going to wrap this up. And then we'll be around afterwards to answer questions.
Bob Cabin on Court Street. 2 questions. The first one, you said that buildings that already in existence, they'll be used to say, all right, we already have that, we can perhaps put some more. On our block, we had a 36-unit building put in through a 40B. Will that be considered like any other building? Well, you already got 36, so we can put another 36 in because you already got it.
Did you want the?
You know,
no. So two answers on that question. One is when I talk about the buildings that we used to guide the zoning, it was really more on the size scale, number of singles, twos, and small scale multifamily. The larger projects are considered unique, and in each case, where they would be allowed, they would only be allowed by special permit. I don't know off the top of my head what zoning district we established for Court Street, but I'm R3. So right there, you know, in our current proposal, the largest scale building that we're suggesting would be special permit, 4 to 8 unit building by special permit. The other thing I'll note is that in doing our analysis and thinking about doing our analysis of building sizes and scales and all that to derive a set of standards, we actually put our cutoff at the year 2000 because we realized that a lot of the large houses that are being pointed to as the problem have been built after that year. So we decided to kind of exclude them from our sample.
And then second question, of all the 8 wards, I think it is, in the city, which one do you think will have most ramifications? Ward 1, Ward 2, which ones might look the most different in 10 years?
That's an interesting question. Of course, there's a lot bundled up in that because zoning is only one aspect of what causes development to happen. You know, the other side of it is always availability of land, what the market's doing, all that. And the other thing I'd say, of course, is that our objective with our project, the zoning redesign project, was really to look at the existing patterns developed in the existing context to drive what happens. We're really looking to these more robust planning processes, like what we did on Union Street, like what's happening on Washington Street, like what we're doing at Riverside, to inform places where there would be really significant change. So it's an interesting question. I'd say it probably is somewhere like Ward 1 or somewhere in that vicinity, but the increment of change is going to be small because we're really working to match what's there today to inform our zoning. So there's basically nowhere here where we in our project, with the exception of Needham Street, where we're being informed by the vision. Otherwise, we're in each case being informed by what's there today, what's the scale of development. So it's the best I can answer that.
Hi, Tariq Lucas. I live on Central Ave. I have 2 questions. The first one is a follow-up to Gail's question from the first one of the evening. If you have a big block of older, nicer Victorian homes, someone buys one and they want to tear it down, can they put up something new that doesn't match it, but apply this to the Newtonville Historic District? The second question, and it's a question for you, James, and you, Barney. Do you recommend that we, the residents of Newton, should have a vote on this new zoning proposal? Thank you.
So, first question, as far as the historic district. So, historic district trumps zoning, right?
Do you have to use the word Trump?
Overrides. Yep, gotcha.
Override's a bad word too.
So do you want to explain that a little bit, James, to get into that?
Sure. So, a historic district is outside of zoning. It's not part of the zoning ordinance. It's part of the regular city ordinances, and it's basically a set of rules about the preservation of those existing homes. So any change to those homes has to go through the local historic district review process. So the decision of that body, if one wanted to tear down one of those Victorians, you'd have to get approval from the local historic district. Very unlikely to approve that drastic a change.
Yeah, I'm on it.
There you go. You want to come up and answer that?
No.
All right. And then
Tariq, I'm going to answer your second question because it came up last night in our Ward 3 meeting where I think everybody voted that they wanted to vote for the zoning code. So this is a common question. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told them that I'm sort of trying to write a letter to, I'm chairing the Zoning and Planning Committee, so all of this is coming to our committee. And we're working with the staff as we go along. And the Zoning and Planning Committee has a very different perspective than one might have as a resident in a ward. We have a lot of things to think about and to weigh and to balance. I'll give you some of them. In the economic development plan that we just approved a couple of months ago, there are zoning changes that are requested are sprinkled throughout the plan. So we have to think about economic development in Newton. So many of us would be pleased to have some commercial development in Newton to take the burden off the real estate tax that we all pay as homeowners. So we'd like to see that, and there are zoning changes across the city requested in that plan. We're also dealing with nearly 30% of us are retired. We've left the jobs in Boston, but we're staying in our homes in Newton because there's no place for us to move to. So what's happening is the younger people who are trying to take those new jobs that we've left behind in Boston have no place to live. And what's happening is there are buildings that are homes that are being developed out in the 495 belt where it's cheaper, but the problem is we're putting more cars on the road. So we're having a terrible impact on climate change by forcing those people to go far away. Our village centers is another thing that we have to take into account. We have storefronts that are vacant. We want to try and encourage people to be in our village centers so that we can have vibrant, thriving stores in our village centers. I mentioned climate change. So these and other things are things of concern to the City Council. We have to think about the city as a whole. And I know that everybody in Newton is thinking about themselves, their street, their village, their neighborhood, and how it affects them. And our job as the City Council is to take that into account, which is why I'm so glad you're here tonight, all of you, making your comments, asking your questions. Lily's been recording them all, and they will all be taken into account. Our job is to take all of that into account, to take the staff's work into account, and develop the best answer for Newton as a whole. So that's why we're not asking each ward to vote on its own zoning code.
Okay, great. Thank you for coming tonight. We're going to stick around for our individual questions.
Did you ever find the build-out numbers?
No, they don't exist. I don't know what they're
I thought they talked about them, they talked about units, and they talked, like if they maximize the size of what could be built, a certain number of units. They have it per district, not per ward. Oh, by district, right, okay. But they had a citywide number.
Still taping?
Yeah, I am. Oh. I was trying to track down that build-out number.
Oh, it's not in that memo.
Actually, it never.
It's in residence 2, 4%. Residence
right, and it never
17%.
Included the neighborhood general or the village district either.
And there's there's no compilation of like here's the total.
A citywide total. Right.
There's no numbers anyway in each zone.
Yeah.
Look at the map.
I did too. I get your email.
Yes, I thought she was. Not many relative to the total number of blocks. I'd say it's I wouldn't be surprised if it was like 1,000. But That's bearing in mind that there's 32,000 lots.
So this is mostly about taking down and building.
Oftentimes it's going to be about that, but I think I would say it's more than about that, because zoning is not just about development. It's also about you making changes to your property. If you want to put a porch on, zoning. If you want to put an addition on your house, that's zoning. So zoning, and or a new business going into a retail space, that's also zoning. So it's not just about, And so part of our goal is to make it, in many cases, easier for individual homeowners to do things with their property, or for an individual business to be able to move into an existing storefront in the village center. Yeah. Thank you for coming out to us.
You guys are what? You're
Yeah, this project's being done in-house by the city.
So you're not that $500,000.
That's not us.
Good. Oh, you guys are good. Now, so then I can, because I live in Newtonville, I live half a block from Preserve Street, right by the South Star Market, to Austin Street, and a block away from the monstrosity. How that ever happened? That Forrest got permission, he's building that monstrosity. I mean, you look at it, it's every day I look at that thing. Will that happen again? And of course, the other thing is buying up all of Washington Street. So, you know, we as Newtonville residents are saying, I'm calling it close for it. Yeah, because that's, he's bought up the police station, the post office.
No, he's not getting the police station.
The post office, he's Whole Foods, he's trying to get the movie theater, and he's got Santander Bank. I mean, this guy's got a vision, it seems to me, that has absolutely nothing to do with what Newtonville wants, the residents of Newtonville. He's, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but he's getting away with it. I mean, why? He's got money. I don't know, maybe
I have kind of half views of that, which is that was the result of him requesting a zone for a district that he assembled property on. He came to the city council and said, I'd like this zone to be in this location. And he went through a long special permit process and eventually was granted that. The Washington Street vision is designed to kind of lay out the zone ahead of time. We established what the zone is. So that's the whole
what is this thing he's building? I went to some of the meetings. Is it 4-story, 5-story? He wanted 6-story. What did he get?
5 in the front.
Okay.
So the 5th story set back a little bit, and then it steps down in the back.
But that's essentially what much of Hello Washington Street would allow is 4 and 5 stories.
On certain sections, yes. Yep.
Well, it would be nice to be able to see this thing go up and then take a, we gather and say whether that's what we want, that kind of a building. I mean, we have no idea what the thing's going to look like. I think I know what it's going to look like. And that's going to be a major, Washington Street does not look like that, what he's trying to build. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Good to see you. All right, take care. Yes. Sure.
So I was listening last night at Franklin Street, and they were talking about maybe having a little more time to review the second draft of the proposal. And you guys were saying you're on a real strict timeline because you're trying to get in front of the developers, which didn't make sense to me. So they asked if we could have a little longer to review it and make comments on it. Okay. So I guess my question is, it seems so odd that a rezoning is being rushed through to get in front of the developers. And I guess my question is, just a moratorium until everyone decides what they want to do. It just
So that was tried.
Yeah, it was tried. When was that tried? Like recently, or
yeah, about a year ago.
Last summer, Lenny Gentile's docket items.
Where do you put a moratorium? The council didn't see fit to do that.
So can we try again, or if a petition comes through? It just feels like there's so much information coming at us, and Because it seems like it's the wrong way, you know what I mean? It just seems odd.
Well, I guess we wouldn't want to propose an alternative come forward without having this in place, because that defeats the purpose of it. So we'd rather have this in place, whatever it is, whatever the size, than to have a proposal come forward and propose a different zone, and we don't have zoning in place.
So I'm just so confused. I'm just talking about, yeah, I'm confused when you said that.
Let me give you an example. So say before we decided we wanted to move ahead with that proposal, propose zoning other than what exists, right? Because he's not going to propose what's there, all the property, and do whatever he wants to do. He's going to come forward with a proposal. With all your modeling process, they're going to make a decision on whether or not they approve the special permit.
It's right. If there's a moratorium, then that wouldn't happen on special permits and larger projects. So that's what you're saying. It went through last. It didn't go through last year.
Lenny did not get enough people to vote. Not enough councilors voted.
Not enough councilors
voted for it. Right.
So I will say that even when we come to the end of the line where we actually present something to the council and say, we think this is good enough for your consideration, they've got to hold a public hearing. They've got to hear from constituents.
So much information coming at us, and like this zone's been going on since 2011. Things are going way too fast. So this zoning for the rest of the state's been going in 2011. When did the Washington Street start? It just feels like every
year ago.
Right?
Yeah, so that's just like, that's fast.
So, all right. Yeah. All right. So something that to think about. It's too much to for most people, and we're not. Yeah.
Well, it's happening all over the city.
Well, we're constantly in a reactive mode.
Question.
Trying to respond to these.
But I thought like even the Riverside had already was decided, and now it's coming back.
It did. The developer decided to move forward. They want to do something different. I mean, that's the way the developer came.
It's warped, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, like, it's a little
and
concerning.
Normandy, the other.
It's also very concerning that this one developer is such a powerful play in our city. I mean, that's kind of scary. This guy Washington Street, Riverside, I'm like, he's involved in everything. It's a little upsetting to see that.
And there's another group of parcels in West Newton, east of the funeral home to the barn, basically, that are controlled by one family who could be a front for Corf.
Yeah, I don't know how much you guys are involved in, but eventually, how powerful this is becoming.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, but people reacting to it.
Oh, I think a lot of people react to it, but
Outside.
there's not a lot you can do in terms of stopping someone from moving forward with the proposal that they have.
Right, I get that.
Consider it and make a decision based on how you feel about it. You can't say, you can't
No,
do
you
anything.
can't do it, right. I get that.
When you're done, I got
A really quick numbers question.
Elaine, you're probably the wrong person to ask me, but go ahead, fire away.
Just real quickly.
Rachel, she's our guru.
So this says max building footprint. Is that each floor? Because if you're saying footprint,
That is correct.
we
So that's the ground
so a
floor.
2-unit at 3 stories, 2,000 square foot footprint is 6,000 square feet.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of confusion about that because I asked a couple of people around me and they had no idea. They thought that was total square footage.
No. Nope.
Yeah, that's huge. You know,
And even at the, so this is the one that the 1,600 in your new proposal would be the 1,400, right?
We've shrunk some of the footprint sizes, yeah.
Yeah.
That's still even 4,200 square feet.
I have a
That's huge
question
house.
relative to that, and I'm still recording. This is the question I would have asked if you'd taken one more question.
I didn't see you had your hand up.
So I figured I'd let the Ward 2 people go. So your tear-down vulnerability analysis is predicated on this studied number based on, you said, 4 sources, that 3,800 square feet is kind of the break point of what a developer wants to be able to build to feel like it's worthwhile. Right, yeah. So I guess my question is, that's under current conditions where they could build up to a lot bigger. If you set a set of conditions where they can no longer build really big houses, is that number likely to move down because that's all they can do? Is a 3,600 or 3,400 or 3,000 square foot house going to be worthwhile to build because that's all they can do?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good question. How will the market react to that?
Right.
Whether the land value will go down because developers now are not going to buy houses because they can't get the economic return that they know they need to get. I don't know the answer to that.
I'm just thinking of kind of the scarcity, because people who would otherwise buy a 4,000 square foot house to move to Newton might buy a 3,000 square foot house to move to Newton, and that would sort of increase the demand. Not that it would reduce the land value, but it would just adjust people's expectations of the size of house, and maybe make builders design houses more efficiently, because a lot of these houses, they've got these like 2 feet, two-story atriums at the entrance, or kind of a lot of dead space. And if you didn't do that, you could have equivalent livable area in a smaller, technically smaller square footage house.
Right. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, so Marty, this one should be
by floor.
It should say by floor.
Not
instead of
footprint, because
footprint.
not everybody knows what
Like me.
footprint is.
Yeah, right. Okay. So this is the footprint here.
Yeah. But when you say max building, I think people are thinking maximum square footage for the entire house or building.
Okay, so
and that's
maybe
a significant
something
difference.
Max per floor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Max square footage per floor.
The lingo is important, I think. Right.
I understand footprint.
Because I asked about 4 people and nobody knew what that meant.
I'll tell you some other things.
Okay.
Wrong, and I was going to read you guys an email, but what you call a story in
I wasn't listening yesterday.
No, I think above is an additional story.
Okay.
In the other districts, it's 4 feet or above. In Helen, Washington, pitch roof is not considered a story. In the other districts, it does.
You mean under the new zoning?
Yeah. And there's a lot of inconsistencies. I mean, you should have the same definition going.
Right.
Between all the districts, but there's some big ones in between what's in Washington and what's in your October. So
No. Not going there.
Yeah, that woman made a very good point about having consistency of terminology.
Yeah.
And
yes.
And I find personally, I find the terminology for Hello Washington Street very obscure. Those acronyms, the VGA, VG, whatever, they're not intuitive at all.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm wrapping up here. I'm gonna finish.